I'm amazed by the correlations I've seen between net worth and just profound mental illness and emptiness. I hear that word a lot. And I don't think that's an accident.
Elon Musk, right? Charismatic, but also an erratic behavior that causes self-destruction. Do you think this is like a character flaw or is more the side we were discussing about burnout?
And I think a lot of people are getting caught in the races of winning sometimes that they miss that.
Welcome to the Bad Podcast, where we turn bad habits into your biggest assets, backed by science. Today, we'll help you understand what's driving irrational and risky money behaviors and how to fix them. My guest today is Dr. Kevin Fleming, a renowned expert in neuroscience-based behavior change for ultra high net worth individuals and high performers. Worked with NFL players, Washington DC politicians, many, many more. Some of his distinctive successes include published work inside the New York Times and Wall Street best-selling book, and endorsements from both the Harvard Medical and Business School faculty. Welcome, Dr. Fleming.
Nice to be here, georgios. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Dr. Fleming, you are the founder of Grey Matters International, a neuroscience-based consulting advisory firm, and you help the ultra-rich change irrational and risky money behaviors. Can you help me understand how you do that? And I'd love to hear more about your fMRI research.
Sure. So basically, I'll give you a quick little overview of what it is, what we are as a company, and then kind of where that sort of dribbles down into in terms of the behavior change work, specifically with these types of people. So Gray Matters was born out of a old school model of neuropsychology, which I was traditionally a part of. I used to joke with colleagues that I was just a guy describing the water to people while they drowned and calling that success. That's kind of what neuropsychologists would do, would be at least tongue in cheek. They would take a bunch of assessments of people who are brain injured, traumatic brain injuries and such, cardiovascular accidents, things like that, get a bunch of scaled scores in various functioning areas, neurocognitively, personality, emotional engagements and regulation, things like that, get a report together and basically show the level of impairments for these areas, but do very little at the end of handing a report over to say, well, here's how you change the brain, right? And so hence my joke of just describing problems really, really well. And that's kind of what we did for years, at least in my opinion. And I did that for a while. And then I decided, after running into some really interesting people in the field who were in the more neuro rehabilitation side, that there were a bunch of people doing incredible results-based, solutions-focused things with the brain. And us neuro shrinks were running around chasing our tail in circles, just kind of describing problems to people and trying to do everything in therapy settings. These guys were just going from A to B in a 3 to 4, 5, 6 times faster kind of way with the brain and without having to over medicate it as the psychiatrists were doing. And so it was really appealing to me, especially when one of my offices is out in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which is a sort of a hub for a lot of high net worth clientele. And I got a chance pretty early on after running into some of my colleagues that were doing some of these neurotech kind of startups and such to pilot some of these ideas out there with these brains that were either some of the Olympic athletes that were training for the ski team would be out there, and I would be doing some TBI kind of stuff with them, or executives that had burnout, a lot of addiction issues, things like that. It was a great little petri dish of a culture to get some very tail end of the bell curve kind of people who were very wealthy, had everything, as you would say, or the world would say, but something was missing, either from an explicit trauma that affected their performance, like an athlete, or an intrinsic kind of angsty, existential, icky something that was broken in them, either related to their path or journey of success and wellness and happiness, or just ancillary to it. But all this to be said, these were people, as you know, that aren't going to sit on a couch and bitch and moan in therapy every week. I know over here in America, that's a big part of our culture. Get your therapist, make your complaint list and go there every week and keep going. It's just a very unsatisfactory model for a lot of the executive mental health folks that I know, or high achievers, CEOs, things like that. And there were some couple family offices out there that were really, in my opinion, your quintessential kind of client for me, because they were high performance, there were executives, but they had family problems, right? They were looking for transgenerational next steps decisions for their family business. And invariably, as you know, in family systems, there's a brokenness at times with us. There's a humanness. Excuse my French, there's shit that happens. Again, how do you help them make great leadership decisions, but not ignore the potential neuropsychiatric problem, which nine times out of 10 is not just in the identified patient of the child, but also in the actual boundary making systems of people who are ultra wealthy. So they kind of go together. So what Gray Matters was really, I think, positioned uniquely to do at the time when I was starting it out about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, was to pilot some of these neurotechnology solutions. Now, you're with these kind of people. Now, your second part of your question was saying, how do we actually do this, right? If you want, I can dive into just a quick upshot of the science behind it, because this is really a key theoretical tenet to what I think makes up gray matters. The brain is evolutionarily designed to go from the brain stem up to the top of the cortex, or the top of your brain, your neocortex is. It's evolutionarily how it was evolved. That's a bottom up. You'll hear this a lot in our colleagues. It's a bottom up approach with neuromodulation, neurorehabilitation type work with people. Clinical psych models, or people that are just normal therapists, counselors, are going from the top down. They're talking at you, at your prefrontal cortex, which here is our CEO of our brain. It's the largest lobe. It's executive functioning, judgment, reasoning, emotional regulation, things like that. So it makes sense that if that's the lobe that we need to change, well, let's start there. That's the top-down approach. And coaches, therapists, counselors, they all share this model, and everyone's got their book or their 7 tips or tools strategy to get somebody to change. But don't take my word for it. If you look at some of the research, this one I always thought was fascinating. There was some research done, I believe Johns Hopkins, with medical school, with people who were on death's door, pretty much had triple coronary bypass surgeries. This is a population that is literally told by doctors, change or die. And there was a wonderful book by Alan Deutschman that came out with that title that's really exploits this thinking. And the idea was, if we track these people, they should change at pretty high rates, because they literally you will die if your lifestyle doesn't change. The odds were fascinating. When you look at the results, it was about 1 in 9 for these people. And I always thought that study stuck with me, and it proves this sort of top down, up down kind of confusion, because the reason they got, I think, in my opinion, 1 out of 9 people changing, was the methodologies they were using were inappropriate to the method, or to the actual ontology of the problem. And we know this in addiction in general, right? We have a lot of people destroying themselves, and family members looking at them going, why? Stop. Because the part that's actually needing to change is different than the part that's responding to you, right? And that sort of, and so why am I getting into this? I find that this epidemic of happiness problems that we see a lot, which I think it grows more with wealth and begets more effusive to kind of figure out, is functional terms with neurology, I think, is a form of a disconnection, a dissociation, akin to addiction. And I don't think you're going to get much result with people unless not only do you understand the sort of brain reorganization kind of aspects of the top down, bottom up kind of distinctions, but also you really need to know about addiction. And it's a 4-letter word, at least over here. Nobody wants to claim that they are. Nobody wants to say that they are. But it's the water we swim in. I mean, hyperstimulation with technology, constantly. We're getting to a place where our midbrain is now under attack 24/7. And as one of my colleagues said in one of their books that I love, the title is fantastic, Your Survival Instinct is Killing You, which is very interesting, because we've gotten to the place now where that part of the brain that's supposed to be denoting just actual threat, actual life death situations, is completely just usurped by informational urgency type needs, which are different than if you're a lion in a savanna, you're coming after a zebra. The zebra's life death circuitry should be going off and run away, fight, flight, freeze kind of thing. We have something that I call a parasympathetic freeze state that's pretty dominant in most of our brains. This isn't a big urgency to change, a meh, kind of disconnection of self that grows over time, because you're seeing that a double bind of the brain is growing in you. Meaning, if I go left, I'm screwed. If I go right, I'm screwed. Well, this is kind of what happens with people who are ultra wealthy, who have a lot of the physical material successes. Having a coach or a therapist say, well, you got to just kind of like stop all this. What? No, like that's not going to happen. And so like that's the false binary choices that are given to these brains don't register because it's a second order change kind of thing that needs to happen, not a first order kind of problem. And as we know this in the behavioral economics research, we know that, wealth is correlated to happiness. Really, it's a one-to-one correlation till about what, maybe 100,000 or something like that. But then the relationship gets asymptotic, and then of course it tanks, right? That's what gray matters is really going after. In essence, we're trying to go after how to pivot these individuals to not fall victim to that trend line, right? Which means you're going to have to do Einstein's quote very well, which is no problem's ever solved on the same level of thinking that the problem got created on. Hence, gray matters coming in on this sort of second order change level with neurotechnology to better reshift and reposition the conceptualization first of the problem. Secondly, the nervous system, the neurophysiology of the body, and then only lastly do you put in those proper behavioral economic type behavior of change principles to help them have what they're seeking. Because we know with addiction, you drive and seek after the thing that doesn't actually give you satisfaction. Well, that's Sisyphus and the boulder. That's pure hell. And in many ways, and we know this with the hedonic treadmill concept, we know that that's what wealth can end up doing to people is quietly and insidiously taking more from you than what it's giving you.
I'd love to go deeper into one of these areas that you discussed. Start maybe with these irrational money behaviors for ultra high net worth, and then go deeper into the happiness that you mentioned, right? This deception. Talk about CEOs and burnout, which is a massive now, or
Yes.
executive wellness, which is now a massive, I think, topic. And then finally, we can maybe talk a little bit about succession that you mentioned before, or how family offices prepare for the next chapter.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
also succession in the corporate world, a giant issue,
Yes.
but also teaching the next generation about neuroeconomics, how to make better financial behaviors and self-control. I think it's quite important.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes. No, I think those are good. So I'm all ears. Let's dive
Yeah,
in.
perfect. So starting with the first topic, as I mentioned, right, some of these bad irrational behaviors of the ultra rich. I wanted to ask you maybe some of the patterns or some of the cases that could help also our audience understand how this erratic behavior manifests and how do we fix it? Because we see the world's richest man, right? So Elon Musk, right? Charismatic, but also an erratic behavior that causes self-destruction, right? And a lot of things can be said whether this is a character flaw or if this erratic behaviors is an output or a signal of burnout, high pressure environments. Do you think this is like a character flaw or is more the side we we're discussing about burnout?
Oof. Oh, you went right into the deep end. Look, what's this great book that I love by Marshall Goldsmith? What got you here won't get you there. I love that title. This is the quintessential problem of, and I'm not picking on the rich here. This is everybody's operational reinforcement, stimulus response kind of way of living, dopamine hits, whatever you want to call it. It's how the engine starts in life. We all move our learn. Dopamine's a learning chemical. If people think it's a pleasure chemical, it's a learning chemical. It helps you practice perfectly whatever you're pairing the dopamine with. Which of course that's practice perfectly bad things or good things. But when dopamine floods, boom, the horses are out of the gate. Let's just take, and I'm going to go back to your question in a second, but this is a really good context because this just tells you the waters we're swimming in because you're actually asking a nature nurture question here, right? Like, which is probably the bigger explanation of the variance, and it's a great question because I have my bias in terms of what I think it leads towards. But let's just take the problem of pornography, and I'll call it a problem. Whether some people just would write me hate mail after hearing this, going, "What's the problem with it?" Well, whatever. But it's a problem when you have a site that gets more hits per day than Amazon and Netflix combined. That's fascinating to me. Moral stuff aside, just brain based. Our brains are not designed to dump that amount of what we call delta phos B into our bloodstream and flood our dopamine receptors at that amount. I mean, addiction for years was really something that was changing more by like the chemical state, the duration, the frequency, the administration choices. Those were kind of your stereotypical variables you changed with the drug. And now we have this new concept of novelty. You can change novelty. It's a whole other dimension of space that we're adding onto this assessment of, and that's what's happening with pornography. The brain has never ever encountered with something like this. It has constant novelty changes whenever it needs to. So I say this as a context because this is the water we're swimming in, and because of hyperstimulation, because of dopamine floods, whether it's through money or through pornography or whatever, those common denominators are good, bad, the ugly. By the time you get out to making character assessments of people, it's very difficult to make because characterological issues in our field, we call them personality disorders, which is what you're alluding to as one of the option here. Is this Musk kind of thing, narcissism, sociopathy, or antisocial stuff, whatever you want to call it, spectrum related. And sure, DSM-5 and all my colleagues have labels for everything. But what we're realizing in the classification system in psychiatry is that I'm not quite sure the way we've done it for years is the way to do it. We should be looking at brain state functioning that's endemic underneath each one of these things. Because what you'll find, like a tree, is you'll see all these branches of these labels, but they have a trunk. And the trunk is typically 9 times out of 10 an epigenetically kind of influenced factor, which includes neurophysiology and pattern behavior where, neurochemistry, substrates are going to change, parasympathetic, sympathetic balances are going to be changing. So by the time you get out there to what the media is showing to people, it's a hodgepodge of factors. But I can tell you this, neuro changes happen before character ones, right? But like any bad habit, things start as a tiny thread and then become a thick cable that you can't cut, right? And it's when most of the behavior, most of the personality disorder diagnoses are usually describing the cable part, right? They're saying, well, they're intractable to change. They seem to lack empathy. They're not taking feedback in and using rational data. Okay, we're back to describing the water as you drown kind of thing. Got it. But that doesn't mean it's a personality disorder necessarily. It's the result of abnormal neurophysiology, in my opinion. Which, when you have folks like Musk or anybody eccentric or on spectrum allegedly or all this stuff, you've got an unbelievable amount of neurodevelopmental factors and environment and genetics that are interacting that by the time we get to the bullseye on the red bullseye on the chest, which is a personality disorder, I'd be careful. Yes, it's necessarily the last stop, last exit on the highway of judging people, but intervene earlier, right? Intervene earlier on the nervous system and the environment around them. We'll see less of these sociopathic type behaviors in our culture for sure.
The reason why I'm asking is because the decisions don't only impact their own company, right? But they can have ripple effects into the wider part of the economy, right? So it's a very interesting topic, and I think, I wanted your opinion in terms of what might be going on there.
Well, you do see, as an aside there, I think it's been shown in HBR articles and such. I mean, there is definitely a correlation between, of course, as you climb the corporate ladder and the existence of these sort of what we call access to psychopathologies. So again, tomato, 6 or half a dozen. It's hard to say what's correlation and what's causality here, right? But I would argue that the incentivizations of the system itself breed this kind of thing. Very few people that I've worked with that are making that amount of money and those that have that amount of power with bonuses and such that are at times it's just unbelievable amounts. At some point, there's a reality, there's literally a reality testing violation that happens. They're in a planet of rules that are outside the natural law of things. To me, it's like if I drop this device down, it's natural law of gravity will always take it to the floor. It doesn't give a shit about my net worth. There's one law. And we saw this with the Me Too movement years ago, right? I mean, there's consequences for people. No matter how many zeros you have at the end of your salary, that's to put the ultra high net worth in that normal curve of reality is because their brains are different and their worlds are different. But at the same time, there shouldn't be reality tested differences. Like, and this is what happens in the marriage work that I do with these couples too, is they're blown away. A lot of these guys, and I'm using that sort of stereotypically, it can be women too, of course, but by the feedback I'm giving them about how they need to change, because basic relational care principles they don't understand. Because the dopamine's been running the show, and there's a lot of it. The cost benefit ratios seem to be always in their favor, and until all of a sudden the spouse says, "No more, not, I don't care," you know, and that's when you get their attention, is because the, the pen has hit the floor, right? There's a natural reality that actually wakes them up, and that's why I go back to that addiction thing. It's like hitting the bottom shouldn't be just reserved as a principle for the quote addict. It's for anybody dissociative who's been living outside the lines of reality. And I think that's what happens over time when you win so much, or when your brain gets flooded, those kind of things. It gets very challenging to remember the humanity of you, and that you're grounded in the same 2 feet that everybody else is.
Would you be able to share some examples to paint the picture also for our audience, right? When we talk about these irrational money behaviors, to what comes to the top of your mind?
Yeah, and they're all on the spectrum, of course. And I had one client in the past who was running a very wealthy, multi-generational business, and for this particular person, the accountants were basically saying, "Hey, look, we've got to change some financial decisions here." But there was an actual primary addiction that was a chemical off the grid, and I think he thought he could keep the lines clear. That's my Friday night party behavior, and then this is me running a company. And the way this works is the brain doesn't kind of build these guardrails that are very well. It makes a one size fits all kind of emotional response. And Antonio Damasio did some interesting work on this years ago. This idea, and this is what a lot of these wealthy people think, is I can do an off the radar, off the grid behavior, and I can still maintain my focus and run a great ship. Okay. So Antonio Damasio, a great neuroscientist, tested this notion that this Aristotelian pure rational reason kind of way of thinking is immune to this other type of emotionality or reactivity. And as if they were different systems. So he took people that had lost the ability to have emotional flooding or emotional reactivity, emotions in general in their limbic area. And he gave them critical thinking tasks. And that back then, this was before computers and such, it was a paper and pencil. And what was fascinating was these people who apparently weren't going to be clouded by emotions couldn't even start the task. They were just staring at the piece of paper. Right. And he did this over and over again. And he started realizing emotions start everything. Okay. You have to care. You have to be right. You have to have something that is that, and we call it eustress. That's not burnout or distress, but eustress is just the right amount of anxiety that gets you up, right? It gets you engaged, alert. And I think what ends up happening is, because there is not this pure, like in marriage work, we hear this a lot, where like the guy will turn to the woman and go, "Look, no, we just got to get the facts, Dr. Fleming. We just need the facts." There's no such thing of that in marriage work, in any type of relational work. If you're trying to just tell people facts, good luck on tell me how that works in the long run. So the idea is that there's this interplay, and the emotionality piece is fundamentally connected to our perceived rationality. And because of that, when you're feeding your sleeping tiger with a little bit of some emotional accelerators, brain won't keep boundaries real clear. It'll sell you that it is, because the brain wants to make you think you're right, but it won't make you effective. It's a kind of this delusional kind of thing it does. And drugs are just always perfectly designed to do this sort of insidious dance. So there's an example, like where people are doing some type of off the grid behavior, and it is affecting the actual running of the business. Most of the types of problems I'm going to get are, again, these guys aren't going to really come up to you when they're in that sort of 68% out of the bell curve, where they're still winning. The wife says they're annoying, or if there's a problem with Johnny, their son, that they're not connecting with them enough, and they're like, okay, I'll get there. Or you're a little angry or irritable. You need to kind of be better on weekends, to be present. You're not here, that kind of thing. Those things they listen to, and they nod their head and go, okay, yeah, I'll get there. You're not going to really get their attention until some biometric or some blood test or some divorce paper or some type of consequence has opened them up a little bit. Now, even then, they'll try to move coconuts around and do the plan with me the way they want to do it, right? Which I get. I mean, that's the way they kind of run their ship. But no matter whether it's an internal angst, a financial oops that they made, or a transgenerational decision that was not smart, an affair that they had, or burnout in general, and the doctor's like, we got to get you to stop, like put boundaries in your life better. That's usually when these guys are walking my way.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about the dopaminergic reward circuitry. You mentioned, right, bonuses, and you mentioned this aggressive risk taking that in many
Mhm.
cases they're
Mhm.
incentivized, right,
Right.
quite aggressively to do that. And then in many cases they might be bailed out in case they fail, right? So what is the medium that you implement, right? And is it something that should be expanded as a responsibility of the board, as a
Mm,
responsibility of the, right? So is it like you have to treat the individual only, or you have to look a little bit at as a company wide
mm.
policy? Because I know you're active also on the executive wellness as part of the
That's right.
CEO
That's right.
package. Do you think this
Right.
approach is more holistic?
It's a good question, because it's a both and, right. It's a dialectic answer. You got to do both, but the timing of each is very interesting. For instance, I will get an executive to wake up quicker when the wife is calling them or calling me than when the board says you need it. Like inside their milieu of the board and the business, they can, maybe they'll wake up a little bit, but when it bleeds over into the personal life, they're like, what? Because they're used to compartmentalizing. So to answer your question, it's interesting when we talk about aggressive risk taking. And again, this is only just a subpopulation. I can't make a global statement of this, but if there's correlates of narcissism to sociopathy, right? Antisocial kind of tendencies, which, as I said, there's a correlation with how you move your way up and have some of these traits. We have seen from neuro research that some of these brains are born with what we call a low arousal state. So what they're going to need to get up to a baseline is going to be overshot in our eyes. All right. We're saying, holy shit, that looks really risky. They're trying to get normal, right? They're trying to feel normal. And so right there, whether it's a board that's concerned about somebody or a spouse, always, and we go back to this idea we started with on our podcast here today, bottom up. You got to get the brain stem to behave itself. You got to get the piece of dissociation out. The only way people do aggressive, risky things that the world would say, huh, what, is if you're not connected to yourself enough. Okay. So most of these folks are winning in a dissociative state, in my opinion. And again, dissociation doesn't knock on your front door and say, hi, I'm dissociation. I'd like to. No, it doesn't. It's there. And most spouses are just living with it because that's who they are, they'll say, or the board says, well, they're talented. We keep getting these kind of wins. So and you can't, and this goes back to your second part of your question. You have to do both. You have to do the culture assessment and the individual piece, because to maintain the changes that I'm going to get for the executive, if I place them back in a petri dish of a toxic culture, or one that is not a high accountability one, or not transformational based, there's gonna be, I'm good, but I don't walk on water. Like, in my neurotech's fascinating, we can help a lot of people. But when you have boundary problems, the best teacher is the world, like in their consequences. And I have a saying in my business, I can help you, or I can help you have the right problems. You pick.
That was interesting. I wanted to focus now on the aspect of happiness, because self-deception now at the top is rising, right? And happiness levels, that what you mentioned in the beginning, right? Maybe they feel deeply unhappy. Can you tell me what you see or explain this hedonic treadmill?
Yeah, I mean, it's gosh, and again, this is something we should not pick on the ultra high net worth, and this is something that is endemic to our world, as I kind of alluded to. Obviously, what the concept is, this idea that what gets you a certain output of dopamine as you win more you're going to need to go faster and harder to get to that same level of contentment, because there's a satiation effect. And then and the reason why they call it the treadmill is you don't win on this one because you're not going anywhere, because it changes the drive, the motivational kind of pull towards a certain goal, but the output starts diminishing, right? Because you've started to blow the receptors. So you feel you need to go harder to get the same amount of output. And that's why we have what we call the opponent process theory in addiction, which means at some point you begin a pull towards something whether it's success or a drug, because you're wanting the rewards of it, and that's okay. And then what ends up happening is because of this hedonic treadmill effect, the motivational system flips, and now you proceed harder, faster, stronger to prevent the pain of not getting your reward. And it's a shift. And in fact, we see this with some of my millionaires and billionaires I work with. As we know, we should know, happiness is more of it's talked about in the shrink world as this absolutism, as it's this thing you have to go after, and someone's going to sell you their program so you can achieve it. That's just, it's silly, because happiness is goalpost moving. And because it's a relative construct, relative magnitude, it's not absolute value. I've had people that are gazillionaires who lose $1 million or $2 million, right? And we know this with the loss aversion effect. Their depression is off the charts. They're still very wealthy. Everything's going fine, but it's the loss. Okay. And so I teach my clients, how can you first have to get a definition of happiness that's sustainable, right? That can appropriately put a middle finger to your brain and say, hey, look, regardless of what you're wanting to construct and tell me as my satisfaction based reward, pleasure and satisfaction is not internal happiness. I like to, and this is me more as a practicing Catholic, but I like to see joy, the construct of joy, as a transcendental one to go after. And what we've noticed in this dopamine flooded world is things that would give you natural joy, a piece of music, a sunset. It's harder to get that dopamine release during those things, right? And that's going to be evolutionarily a very interesting thing to watch over time. I mean, I've had to coach people to literally not just put their phones down and stop technology, but start actually like activating what we call the default mode network, which is to take your eyes and start moving it in time and space, left and right around a horizon, so you can scan an environment in a indicated way from our culture, because everything's what? Up, down, scrolling, scrolling, scrolling. Our eye muscles are doing this way. This scanning is an unbelievably odd skill that we've stopped doing. And by virtue of that, we've stopped seeing what we actually have in front of us, the value of human being in front of us, the value of our environment. We are locked into an up-down kind of motion. And I'm worried about what's going to change in the eye muscles, but that's a whole nother talk. But to answer your question, the default mode network is what we need to be accessing. And the only way we're going to get into that imaginative, creative space is to stop. A quick little story for you. I had done an international trip with an Asian business culture, and I did my talk. It was our break. And I, like everybody in America or in the Western world, when you're done in your break, you flip your laptop open, the phone comes out, you check your emails, you start moving it. And these Asian executives were watching me, and they just looked at me. They didn't say anything. They got up out of the room, they left, and I was waiting because I was thought, okay, that was it was more than a 15-minute break. Nobody's coming back. And I went out to the secretary. I said, where are these guys? They said, oh, they left for the day. They left you a note. And I read the note, and it was a very humbling thing for me, but it was basically, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was basically saying, look, in our culture, after we do something as deep and intimate as we did, we sit back and we process. We just shut up. We integrate. We stop. We close our eyes. We meditate. We do whatever we ever to seep it in. We don't move on to the next task. We find that offensive, that we can go to relational deep and just go into transactional like you guys do, relational transactional, like it's just a McDonald's drive-through therapy kind of thing, like boom, boom. We don't do that. We care, and we take moments to care after we process that. And if it takes time. So we appreciate you coming out here. Good luck with you, but we're not working with you. It's fantastic failure for me, because it was, I mean, as everybody has these stories, these failures shape your vision. They shape where your direction is. It's can't go after success all the time. And these failures are beautiful gifts. And for me in Gray Matters, it was really a chance to kind of say, all right, this isn't just a theoretical kind of love of mine for my business. I've been there. I'm equally in the same hyperstimulated soup, swimming around like we all are. And if we don't watch it, that was an inadvertent step of the toes, but we can really do damage not only to our own brains, but relationally to the brains of our team members. If we drive our team as if they're just transactional people. And I think you said it earlier with the burnout question. I'm seeing unbelievable rates of burnout that are happening now post COVID. With this, I think what happened when we went back into Zooms and at home, everybody thought you could just work your ass off 24/7 whenever you wanted because you're at home at least. Of course, entrepreneurs know that boundary problem all the time. Anyways, I won't ramble, but yeah, I think I tapped into what your happiness question was there.
Yes, absolutely. I spoke just a couple of days ago with another expert. He was into extreme sports and extreme triathlete, and he was
Mm.
saying what you mentioned about addiction. That a lot of people are transforming their addiction, from gambling, from other areas of their work, and they're finding that stimulus into the extreme sport, right? But the mistake they make is they kind of destroy themselves in areas where they should not necessarily compete. So that level of discomfort that you need in order to find happiness, right, is required, but you have to be more intelligent where, like, to actually go hard on yourself, right? Not a marathon.
So that's a great point you brought up, and this kind of is another point to kind of wrap people up around on this talk because I have a saying in my business that when I work with my people, it's like I'm not going to work on your free will. I'm going to work on your free won't. And people look at that and they go, well, "What the hell are you talking about?" I go, "Well, let's just go down to the neuroscience side of things. Your limbic system, where the impulse and the drive and the emotional kind of go is coming from, is roughly speaking about 7 times stronger from here to here, which is your brake system. So your gas to your brakes about 7 times stronger than your brake system back down to the impulse. So if it's a 7-to-1, roughly, kind of asymmetric relationship, the ability to use free will to say no is different than the skill that I call free wonting because it's not free will anymore. It's almost at a whole nother level. You almost have to pivot them out of the idea of will and effort, will. And that's the problem now. We have this false God, this idolatry in our culture that I can, I can, I can, I can, I can. I want, I want, I want. And it's just like you're already driven 7-to-1 and you're gonna drive more of the I into everything. I try to teach and coach this reversal, and it's kind of what you were saying. It's context, nuance, discernment around how you want to do your pleasure seeking. You got to have a good brake system that pushes back to maybe just do what like that Asian team that I was working with was doing. Just wait, sit, do nothing, nothing, not the fake kind of nothing, which is sitting there with your phone. That's not real nothing. Okay. Real nothing and discern. We can discern typically as human beings pretty well between something really, really bad non-bad. Let's call it that. I was about to say good, but no, we're not good at that. Bad and non-bad is probably our best that we get. But to discern between what's essential and what's merely important, good luck on that one today. Because the dopamine's made everything it's not, hey, if I go after my dopamine stuff, I'm not hurting anybody. That's the benchmark we use, right? I'm not killing anyone. I'm not a bad guy. Like I had this one CEO did a 360 evaluation with, and I just wanted to see how he tee it up. So he's with his executive team. I'm process observing in the corner. And he's up there, he gets his 360 and he looks at it and he goes, okay, guys, thanks for giving me, thanks for this. It says that you guys see me as unavailable, emotionally unavailable, not present, task driver, maybe not really being into the relational piece. I'm not really that, right, guys? You don't see me as that, right? Okay, good. I didn't think so. And he just kind of go down and I'm sitting there going, I'm like, no, this is your data from your team, right? But it's like, we do that. If we're allowed to, we'll do that. We'll try to get the narrative moved, reduce cognitive dissonance, which ends up being the real driver. It's not, we live in a culture where everyone's trying to call out everybody for truth. I call it bullshit because we're actually not seeking truth. If you were seeking truth, you do it more delicately, beautifully, sweetly, and relationally. And I don't see anybody doing that. Truth people don't call out people. They're calling for things. Okay. And so what we're doing now is trying to reduce dissonance. We're trying to help us feel more right that we have the truth. And in doing that, feel more safe with our pedestal that we're on while we're putting down somebody else. I'm not saying there's not some aspects of things that need to be changed, but the methodology of how you're doing it is completely the wrong way of doing it, in my opinion. But that's a whole nother show.
Moving to the next aspect, I wanted to touch upon the succession aspect that you discussed before, right? So there are a couple of different angles there. Maybe one is preparing the next generation of these high net worth individuals, right? Their kids, right? Their successors, to be able to handle money, build self-control, which is so important for lifelong financial independence, right? What do they actually teach their kids, right? So I would expect they would be teaching them self-control. Is that really the case? Are you involved into that kind of
That's a good
discussion,
question.
maybe practically?
Yeah, no, it's funny. It's there was a great saying one by one of my mentors, and I don't know if they got it from somewhere. I'm not sure the source of it, but it was told to me early on. Happiness is in the waiting room of happiness, and I always thought that was an interesting quote. Um, and I think what it was trying to say, at least how I took that quote, was there's tenets of reality that need to be taught before you get into generational succession planning. It's it's sort of like we use that tree metaphor again, the trunk of the tree, the branches. I mean, so many people in the consultants and family business work are up on that branch level doing all the financial discussions, how you get people ready, da 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 da, all the different plans, da da da. I get that, but I'm an ontology guy. I'm teaching reality stuff. I'm teaching the trunk of the tree. And they're not so sexy things. All right. These are the things that you got to learn about delay of gratification, boundaries, where you stop and someone begins. How did you raise Johnny? Like in the marshmallow study that everybody talks about, are your kids the people that were grabbing the marshmallow or were they waiting for it? Right. And how did you, as parents, perpetuate that dynamic? This is what's so funny is they'll call me to change one of their generational kids, and I'm like, as if they had no play in shaping this, right? As if it's this independent decision of like, okay, they're dealing with X, Y, Z. They don't seem to care. They seem to have all, and I'm there going like, where the hell were you when you're raising this kid? Because your decision making seems pretty off, and then all of a sudden they think, poof, like a consultant can, you can just kind of make that right, and that's where the succession planning gets tough. I don't sell non-solutions to my guys, but I'm saying to them, we have to have a come to Jesus here. We got to know what is, and we have to hop into what is. And before you get your quote plan, let's get the right problems introduced for your kids because there's some pieces here that learning and experience need to happen that need to get them going before you get this next thing going. And that's where it can become difficult because some family systems don't want to do that level of hard work as part of this answer. Right. And I think that's where Gray Matters is different as a consulting firm is we're not going to put aside the psychological family system boundaries work. We can't. It's a fundamental law of reality. We have to do that before you do your prefrontal cortex teaching top down stuff of what you want to have happen, expectation, accountability wise with your kid. And I think that's where we're really different in my company is our assessment methodologies, our neuroscience tools can really get at what's likely for somebody, right? In predicting whether they'll actually get the memo and change. There's a lot of these kids that aren't horribly bad kids that are about to inherit a lot of money. They're not. They're not doing cocaine. They're not necessarily doing, but they're misusing boundaries in a way that will create a problem eventually. And that's a very, it's a very difficult. I used to say this metaphor a lot with my family systems I work with. You don't give a kid cocaine and tell them out of boundaries to use it Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but not Tuesday, Thursday. It's ridiculous, right? Some of these family systems didn't know the power of what they were dealing with this thing called money. And akin to cocaine, which we've actually seen kind of gives the same amount of kick as cocaine. So then too late, they're trying to do boundaries because they're trying to say, well, we're trying to separate this stuff now. And I mean, you just put a needle in their vein for 20 some odd years. And now you think they're going to be sober to the new system of thinking, like that kind of thing. It gets very challenging. Again, if I had to kind of do my sort of closing spiel on this, I would tell you that, money, technology, winning, wealth, they become such a part of the air you breathe. You tell a fish he doesn't know the water they're swimming in. These are insidious, quiet factors that can influence your decision making for all the things that we were talking about to prevent burnout, to develop a good family business in the next generation, to be a good spouse, to be a good leader. I've done this for almost 30 years now, and there is no way of skirting this question of excellence and how to be a virtuous person. And I think sometimes dopamine and winning and succession planning, all these strategic things, we forget that you actually have to also wake up with yourself every day too. And existentially, this is a very big area. It's a big responsibility to have this amount of wealth. Not just, for the planning purposes of what you're going to do legacy wise, but for your own prevention of depression, for your own prevention of meaning making. What am I here for? I'm amazed by the the correlations I've seen soft-wise just between net worth and just profound mental illness and emptiness. I hear that word a lot, and I don't think that's an accident. That's not we'll go back to your other question, that's not some characterological defect in Johnny Jones versus Sammy over here. That's gonna be nurture over nature for sure, and the nurture factor on this with these guys, it's a hard you're swimming upstream, and like that 7-to-1 kinda asymmetric difference, I think the big piece of takeaway here is it isn't just a 1-to-1. You have to already it's like turning a sailboat in the wind. You have to be countering that force earlier on and knowing that that's the 7-to-1 differential that you're working with. And I think a lot of people are getting caught in the races of winning sometimes that they miss that incline to their
Yeah, so if I understand well, also you're talking about the level of prognosis is so much better, so that you can avoid developing these burnout.
Yeah, and I think that's where, it's like the best teacher is a good parent that knows boundaries. The second best one is the stuff we use at Gray Matters, which is neurotechnology. When we got to short circuit the machine and we got to at least get a lot of the neurophysiology to be at least grounded better so you can receive wisdom, that's what we're trying to do, accelerate the process of learning transformationally. But to do that, you have to hit the brainstem level first. So that's if people want to learn more, they can reach out.
Dr. Fleming, such a pleasure. I thanks so much, and
Thank
appreciate all the insights you shared today for me and the audience.
Thank you again. It's good to be here and I appreciate you all.
And for everyone that watching, thanks so much, and I'll catch you in the next episode.
Thank you again.